For 37 years, there was a message that never failed to arrive. This year, it did not. December arrives in silence. It always does. The cold air settles over the city, carrying with it the weight of endings. For most people, December 10th is an ordinary date. Another box on the calendar. Another day erased by routine. But for Yu Menglong, for those who loved him, and for a woman whose life was shaped by his existence, that day was never ordinary. It was his mother's birthday. For 37 consecutive years, regardless of distance, exhaustion, or obligations, there was a ritual that was never broken. A message would arrive, sometimes brief, sometimes playful, sometimes tender, but always present. A son reminding his mother that he had not forgotten her, that she mattered, that the bond between them had survived time, fame, and separation. This year, there was nothing. No message, no voice, only silence. Silence has a particular way of announcing itself. It fills the space with more force than any sound ever could. In that absence, something fundamental changed, not just for a family, but for anyone still seeking clarity in a story that had officially been declared concluded. Yu Menglong is gone. That is acknowledged. What remains unresolved is everything that came after. On the day that should have been marked by celebration, a much more unsettling realization emerged. No one could confirm where his mother was. She did not appear. She did not speak. There were no photographs, no recorded messages, no guarantees that she was safe. The woman, who should have been the most visible presence on that day, became completely unreachable. At first, some tried to explain it. Perhaps she needed privacy. Perhaps she was being protected. Perhaps the silence was a personal choice. But in cases like this, absence is never neutral. When a story is incomplete, every missing element becomes a question. And this was no minor detail. In any investigation involving a disputed death, there is a figure that holds irreplaceable weight. The next of kin, the legal voice, the only person with unquestionable authority to challenge an official conclusion. Without that voice, the case doesn't just weaken, it simply collapses. That is why her disappearance matters. While messages flooded social platforms from all over the world, offering birthday wishes addressed to a woman who might never see them, the contradiction became impossible to ignore. Thousands spoke. The one person who mattered most could not. Here we must pause. Not to speculate recklessly, not to assign blame, but to acknowledge something much more uncomfortable. When the only person who can speak the truth disappears, silence itself becomes evidence. This story does not begin with a conspiracy. It begins with a ritual that ended. A message that never arrived, a mother who could not be located, and a question that refuses to fade with time. If this was simply an accident, why does every path toward closure lead to a void? Here is where the official record ends and where our examination begins. In any disputed death, facts do not disappear all at once. They erode silently, methodically. The process rarely begins with the direct destruction of evidence. It begins with the elimination of voices. In this case, there was a voice that mattered more than all the others combined. Yu Menglong's mother was not a symbolic figure. She was not a grieving presence destined solely to receive condolences. By law and by procedure, she was the only person with the authority to reopen questions that had been prematurely sealed. Without her consent, without her testimony, any attempt to challenge the official narrative would fail before even reaching a courtroom. This is not speculation. This is how the system works. If a death is declared accidental and no immediate family member contests that conclusion, the case enters a state of legal lethargy. Files remain closed. Timelines freeze. Accountability dissolves into administrative language. What remains is a record that appears to be complete while answering nothing. That is why her absence changed everything. In the days following Yu Menglong's death, observers expected to see her, not out of morbid curiosity, but because precedent demanded it. In similar cases, families either withdraw completely from public view or step forward decisively. They speak, they appear, they assert their existence as a form of both protection and resistance. Visibility in these situations is survival. Other families understood this instinctively. Parents of public figures lost under unclear circumstances learned that silence invites erasure. Cameras, statements, even brief appearances serve a function that goes beyond grief. They create witnesses. They establish that someone is still watching. Yu Menglong's mother did the opposite. Or perhaps something prevented her from acting otherwise. There were no appearances at hospitals, no statements, not even carefully redacted ones, no public acknowledgement, nor a distant photograph confirming her well-being. The absence was total, and a total absence is rarely accidental. At first, soft explanations circulated, that she was elderly, that she was frail, that she needed rest. Some claimed she was being protected for her own safety. Others asked the public to respect her privacy. Privacy is a reasonable request. Protection is a comforting theory. But neither explanation justified the complete lack of a trace. In an era where even anonymity leaves footprints, she left none. No confirmed location, no intermediary, no authorized spokesperson. What unsettled both investigators and observers was not just that she remained silent, but that no one could verify if that silence was voluntary. Chosen silence still leaves evidence of choice. Imposed silence leaves only questions. We must be precise here. There is a difference between refusing to speak and being unable to do so. One is agency, the other is elimination. As the days passed, comparisons emerged. Other parents, faced with similar pressures, chose a different path. They appeared on live streams. They repeated simple phrases. They allowed themselves to be seen, not to argue their case, but to state that they still existed. They understood something fundamental. When too many eyes are watching, certain actions become difficult to hide. Yu Menglong's mother never made that calculation, or she was never given the chance to do so. This distinction matters. From a legal perspective, her disappearance halted any momentum. Without her, no formal complaint could move forward, no petition could be filed, no reopening of the case could be demanded. The system did not need to suppress opposition, it only needed to wait. Time in these situations is not neutral. Time favors closure. Time exhausts outrage. Time reframes tragedy as past history. And time requires silence. We must ask ourselves an uncomfortable question. If her safety was the priority, why was her safety never publicly confirmed? If she was free, why was not even indirect proof allowed to surface? The slightest acknowledgement would have been enough. Instead, there was nothing. In cases involving intimidation, disappearance is rarely permanent at the beginning. It starts as distance, then inaccessibility, then uncertainty. By the time concern solidifies into suspicion, the absence has already been normalized. What distinguishes this case is not the lack of answers, but the speed with which questioning became impossible. Without her voice, all paths narrowed, all appeals collapsed inward. The case did not need to be refuted. It only needed to become unreachable. And so the witness vanished. Not declared missing, not reported as being in danger, simply removed from the narrative. If she is free, why can no one find her? In highly controlled systems, silence is rarely accidental. When information appears and disappears with precision, it does not signal chaos, but containment. Every word that reaches the public has already survived an internal negotiation. Every image has been evaluated against its consequences. That is why the recent behavior of state-affiliated media demanded attention. It began subtly. Accounts with official credentials started posting videos late at night. Brief clips, familiar melodies, songs associated with Yu Menglong. Nothing explicit, nothing direct. By morning, every trace had disappeared. The posts were deleted as if they had never existed. This pattern repeated night after night. Appearance. Deletion. If the content was forbidden, it would never have been published. If it was permitted, it would not have been deleted. The contradiction was not an error, it was a signal. Within institutional media, deletion is not an impulsive act, it is a decision. And decisions of that kind reflect internal tension. One sector authorizes the publication. Another demands its removal. What the public witnesses is the residue of conflict. In systems where dissent cannot be expressed directly, it learns to do so indirectly. Language shifted from names to metaphors, from statements to symbols. A short video appeared showing a small fish swimming against the current. The text praised resilience, celebrated resistance without identifying its recipient. There was no explanation. It was not necessary. The metaphor serves a function when direct speech is dangerous. It allows for acknowledgement without accusation. Whoever understands, understands. Whoever must deny can do so with plausibility. These messages are not aimed at the uninformed. They are aimed at those who are already watching closely. Observers noted that this behavior was not isolated. Other state-aligned media adopted similar tactics: brief gestures, ambiguous images, content that skirted the edge of acceptability before being withdrawn. The pattern suggested a fracture rather than a unified directive. In environments where consensus rules publication, incoherence implies disagreement. This is not proof that the truth is being revealed. It is proof that the truth is being contested. The removal of Yu Menglong's name from certain restriction lists further intensified the uncertainty. For months, his name had been suppressed. Searches were redirected. Mentions disappeared. Then, without any explanation, the restriction was lifted. The timing was not accidental. Some interpreted it as a victory. Others saw it as a provocation, a test. In conflicts that cannot surface openly, public reaction becomes data. Allowing a name to reappear serves to measure how much resistance still exists. Warnings came quickly, accounts disappeared, posts were deleted mid-conversation. Users alerted each other to proceed with caution. The fear was not imaginary, it was observable. At the same time, most figures within the entertainment industry retreated into silence. Silence, once again, became a form of self-preservation. But one action broke that uniformity. During a nationally broadcast appearance, an actor quoted a phrase widely associated with Yu Menglong. The words were neutral on the surface, philosophical, inspiring. However, their origin was unmistakable to anyone familiar with the case. The moment passed without comment. No correction was issued. There was no subsequent clarification. The ambiguity remained intact. These gestures matter not because they declare loyalty, but because they demonstrate constraint. When support cannot be expressed directly, it manifests through references, through memory, through phrases that survive censorship because they seem harmless. This is how acknowledgement works under pressure. None of these actions confirm a narrative. None prove misconduct, but together they reveal instability. They suggest that the story is not resolved behind closed doors, even if it appears closed in public. Media does not behave this way without reason. In cases where the truth is not in dispute, communication is coherent. In cases where suppression is total, silence is absolute. This case occupies a third space, one where messages leak out involuntarily, where deletion becomes more eloquent than publication. The media is speaking, just not with words. Sometimes what is removed speaks louder than what remains. The first sound did not come from a scream, it came from analysis. When the video appeared, it was brief, fragmented, low resolution. The kind of material that emerges not because it was meant to be seen, but because it escaped control. At first glance, it showed very little. Flashes of light, erratic movement, a background too dark to be identified with certainty. Then the audio was isolated. What emerged from that isolation changed the tone of the entire discussion. Dry, percussive sounds were heard. Sudden, repetitive. They were not echoes. They were not fireworks. It was not metal hitting concrete. People with technical experience slowed down the track, filtered out the background noise, and compared the waveform with known samples. The conclusion was cautious but consistent. 11. Distinct detonations, high speed, short intervals. Acoustic signatures compatible with gunshots. 11. Numbers matter when bodies do not appear. Official statements describe the night as contained, controlled, a localized incident. However, the soundscape told another story, one of escalation, of force applied repeatedly. In environments where lethal tools are uncommon, repetition is never incidental. This raised a question much more disturbing than any individual death. Who were the others? Previous leaks had hinted at the presence of other people that night. Not participants, not aggressors, witnesses, people who ran toward the chaos instead of fleeing from it. Accounts suggested that several individuals tried to intervene, to help, to extract someone who was already injured. Those accounts ended abruptly. No names were released, no subsequent reports emerged. No hospital admissions matched the timeline. If they existed, they disappeared without leaving a record. The material showed no faces, showed no bodies. Only light, movement, and sound. But the sound repeated 11 times demands interpretation. Residents near the complex described fear rather than surprise. They did not speak of confusion. They spoke of helplessness, of the kind that arises when force surpasses authority. Security personnel were present, but irrelevant. The police arrived, but were ineffective. The response did not suggest incompetence, but restriction. Professional restriction. This level of suppression does not happen spontaneously. It requires coordination. Silence is not imposed only with absence. It is imposed with consequences. But the most unsettling element of this story does not come from that night. It comes from before, long before the video, long before the sounds. It comes from the moments when Yu Menglong was still alive, still visible, still smiling. Viewers began to review old recordings, interviews, promotional appearances, clips that had previously been considered ordinary. In isolation, nothing seemed alarming. In sequence, patterns emerged. His posture was defensive, his movements contained. In some appearances, he repeatedly touched his abdomen. His way of walking suggested pain. These details were not dramatic enough to generate alarm at the time. They only acquired meaning in retrospect. Then there was the gesture. In several recordings, his fingers tapped his leg or a nearby surface. Not randomly, rhythmic, deliberate. 3 short taps, 3 long pauses, 3 short taps again. At first, it was dismissed as a nervous habit until someone recognized the pattern. Short, short, short. Long, long, long. Short, short, short. A universal distress signal. SOS. If this interpretation is correct, the implication is devastating. It suggests that the plea for help was not confined to his final hours. It was constant, subtle, hidden in plain sight, camouflaged by the performance. He smiled while asking to be rescued. This is the cruelest aspect of the entire case. Not that the signal was sent, but that it was received too late. Or worse, that it was not received at all. The public applauded, the cameras recorded, the contracts continued, the mechanism moved forward, unaware or reluctant to acknowledge what was unfolding beneath the surface. When help finally arrived, it may have arrived amidst violence, and those who stepped forward may have paid a price that never entered the record. The night ended. Official explanations arrived. The files were closed. But signals do not disappear simply because they were ignored. The signal was there. We simply did not want to see it. Silence has consequences. Not immediate, not dramatic. Its damage accumulates slowly, settling in the spaces where accountability should exist. By the time it becomes visible, the damage is already done. We inevitably return to the same absence. Yu Menglong's mother should have been here. Not in front of the cameras, not offering statements designed for public consumption, but present, verifiable, alive within the record. Her continued disappearance remains the most unresolved element of this case because it blocks all paths toward closure. Birthdays come and go. Public attention shifts. New headlines replace the old ones. Meanwhile, the entertainment industry resumes its rhythm. Calendars are reset. Celebrations return to the screens, music plays. Performances continue as if nothing had fractured beneath the surface. For the system, this is stability. For a mother who lost her son, stability means nothing. There is no public acknowledgement of her condition, no confirmation of her safety, no sign that she has been granted agency over her own silence. The absence is not treated as an emergency, but as an inconvenience best left unaddressed. This is how silence becomes policy. No official statement denies the existence of irregularities. None admit them. The narrative remains carefully suspended between denial and omission. In that space, accountability dissolves. When no one speaks, no one has to answer. We must be clear. This investigation does not claim guilt, does not issue verdicts, does not pretend to know that which cannot be proven. What it does is document patterns: absence, inconsistency, suppression through delay rather than direct force. These patterns are not unique to this case. History is full of examples where silence survived the truth, where victims were only remembered after time made accountability impossible. The cost of silence is not measured in outrage, it is measured in erosion. Every unanswered question reduces the expectation that an answer will ever arrive. Every absent witness reinforces the belief that disappearing is effective. Every ignored signal teaches observers that attention has limits. And yet, silence is fragile. It depends on forgetting. It depends on exhaustion. It depends on the assumption that people will eventually move on. As long as the questions remain alive, that assumption fails. Yu Menglong's story persists not because it is sensational, but because it is unfinished. The message that never arrived, the witness who vanished, the signals hidden in plain sight. None of these elements fade cleanly. This record does not ask for belief in a single explanation. It asks to resist the comfort of closure. To recognize that some stories do not end because they were resolved, but because they were abandoned. Silence demands participation. It survives only when no one challenges it. As long as the questions remain alive, the truth has not been buried.